The Duke of Ashcombe had long been admired throughout Regency England as a gentleman of uncommon dignity. At 36 years of age, he possessed everything society considered desirable: an ancient title, prosperous estates, an elegant manor surrounded by rolling green hills, and a reputation for fairness that earned respect from both noble families and humble tenants. Newspapers praised his charitable works, neighbors spoke warmly of his wisdom, and every fashionable drawing room regarded him as one of the country's most eligible gentlemen. Yet beneath the polished manners and composed smile lived a quiet uncertainty that no fortune could silence. His parents had died when he was still a young man, leaving him not only wealth, but responsibilities far greater than most inherited. He managed his lands carefully, ensuring tenants were treated honestly and servants worked under reasonable conditions. Every decision carried the weight of preserving generations of family honor. Though surrounded daily by dozens of people, he often felt strangely alone, uncertain whether anyone truly cared for the man behind the title. His engagement to Lady Beatrice Ashford appeared to remove every concern. She came from an equally distinguished family, possessed remarkable beauty, and moved through London's highest circles with effortless grace. Society celebrated the match as perfect before either family formally announced it. Newspapers praised their compatibility. Elderly duchesses declared the union destined for greatness, and invitations to every grand occasion arrived addressed to them together. Lady Beatrice never behaved improperly. She was always punctual, elegantly dressed, and unfailingly polite. During dinners, she smiled with practiced warmth. At public gatherings, she rested her hand gently upon his arm and spoke of their promising future. Guests admired the ease with which they complimented one another. Anyone observing them would have believed genuine affection flourished between them. Yet the Duke noticed countless little moments invisible to everyone else. Whenever he spoke about estate improvements that would benefit struggling tenant families, she redirected the conversation toward renovations of the ballroom or plans for larger receptions. When he discussed books or history, she politely listened before steering the discussion toward fashionable acquaintances. She frequently admired portraits that would soon belong to her after marriage, but seldom asked what memories they held for him. If he appeared tired after long hours reviewing estate accounts, she encouraged him to rest, so he would appear refreshed at upcoming social engagements rather than asking what troubled him. None of these actions were cruel. They were simply empty. Each conversation left him feeling as though she admired the future Duchess of Ashcombe more than the future husband standing beside her. Whenever uncertainty crept into his thoughts, older relatives dismissed it. Affection grows after marriage, one aunt assured him. A sensible match requires compatibility of station, not endless sentiment, remarked another nobleman. Even his closest acquaintances insisted he was fortunate beyond measure. Gradually, he began wondering whether his expectations were unrealistic. Perhaps true companionship existed only in novels. Within Ashcombe Manor worked dozens of servants, whose duties unfolded with quiet precision every day. Among them was a young maid named Clara, 23 years of age. Her father had once served as a respected village schoolmaster until illness exhausted the family's modest savings. After both parents passed away, Clara entered domestic service to support herself with dignity rather than charity. Unlike many servants, she possessed a thoughtful education. She spoke carefully, read whenever her duties allowed, and carried herself with quiet confidence that neither sought attention nor invited sympathy. The Duke rarely exchanged more than a few words with her. Yet over several months, he noticed small acts few others observed. She remembered which flowers eased headaches and placed them discreetly in rooms where weary guests rested. She quietly left warm tea outside the study whenever the Duke worked late into the evening without disturbing him. If elderly servants struggled with heavy tasks, she completed the work before anyone could ask. She never expected praise, and if thanked, she simply smiled before returning to her responsibilities. One autumn afternoon, the Duke accidentally dropped several estate papers while leaving the library. Before nearby footmen reacted, Clara knelt to gather the scattered pages, arranging them carefully in their proper order. "I hope nothing important has been misplaced, Your Grace," she said respectfully. "Nothing appears missing," he replied. "I'm relieved," she answered with genuine sincerity, before quietly continuing down the corridor. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet its simplicity lingered unexpectedly in his thoughts. She had spoken to him neither with fearful obedience nor ambitious familiarity, but with ordinary human concern. Several evenings later, while searching through his late grandfather's private library, the Duke discovered a weathered leather journal filled with reflections collected across decades. Most pages discussed duty, leadership, and integrity. Near the final chapters, one sentence had been carefully underlined. "Prosperity attracts admiration. Hardship reveals devotion." He read the words repeatedly. They unsettled him because they echoed the questions he had buried for years. If his fortune vanished tomorrow, who would remain? Unable to dismiss the thought, he sought counsel from the family's elderly physician, a trusted friend who had served Ashcombe Manor since the Duke's childhood. Together they conceived a quiet, honorable plan. The physician would announce that the Duke suffered from a grave illness requiring prolonged isolation, with no certainty of recovery. Only the physician and the Duke would know the truth. As heavy curtains closed across his chamber, the Duke wondered whether he was about to uncover the hearts of those around him, or finally confront the loneliness within himself. The physician's announcement spread through Ashcombe Manor with quiet restraint. Servants lowered their voices in the corridors, relatives exchanged worried letters, and neighboring estates sent carefully worded messages expressing hope for the Duke's recovery. According to the physician, His Grace had developed a severe illness that demanded complete rest, limited visitors, and constant observation. Recovery was possible, but no one could predict how long it might take. The Duke remained in his private chamber, reading, writing, and reflecting while allowing the carefully arranged deception to unfold. Only the physician knew that beneath the pale appearance created by dim lighting and reduced public appearances stood a perfectly healthy man wrestling with uncomfortable questions about loyalty and affection. Lady Beatrice arrived the very next morning. She entered gracefully, carrying fresh flowers arranged in an expensive crystal vase. Her expression displayed proper concern, and she spoke in soft tones suitable for a sick room. "I cannot bear seeing you like this," she whispered. The Duke thanked her warmly. For the first half-hour she asked after his health, complimented the physician's care, and assured him everyone in London prayed for his recovery. Yet before departing, her attention drifted toward practical matters. "The spring wedding will almost certainly require postponement," she said thoughtfully. "Mother believes society will understand, though it will disappoint many guests." The Duke simply nodded. Her concern seemed genuine, yet strangely divided between his condition and the inconvenience surrounding it. During the following week, she returned several times. Each visit became slightly shorter. She often described social events she had reluctantly declined, fashionable acquaintances who had expressed sympathy, and conversations concerning future plans once his strength returned. Rarely did she ask how he spent the long hours confined indoors, or whether fear troubled him during uncertain nights. Instead, she assured him everything would eventually return to normal. The words sounded comforting, but somehow lacked warmth. Outside the chamber, life inside the manor quietly adjusted. Housekeepers reorganized duties. Footmen carried meals upstairs. The steward postponed estate inspections until the Duke recovered. Many servants performed their responsibilities faithfully, though anxiety slowly settled over the household. Some wondered whether reduced income might eventually require dismissals if the illness continued. Amid these changes, one routine remained remarkably constant. Every morning before sunrise, Clara entered the Duke's chamber carrying clean linens and fresh water. She opened the curtains just enough to welcome gentle morning light without disturbing his supposed recovery. She replaced fading flowers with blossoms gathered from the manor gardens. She arranged books neatly beside the bed. She never hurried. Her movements reflected quiet care rather than obligation. Believing the Duke slept most mornings, she occasionally spoke softly while working. "I hope today is kinder than yesterday, Your Grace." Or sometimes, "The roses are blooming beautifully. I imagine you would enjoy seeing them again soon." She expected no reply, The Duke listened silently, surprised that such ordinary remarks carried more comfort than polished speeches delivered by distinguished visitors. One afternoon, the physician deliberately remained away longer than usual to observe how the household managed without him. Clara noticed that the Duke's untouched luncheon tray still rested beside the bed. Assuming illness had stolen his appetite, she quietly prepared a light broth in the servant's kitchen using vegetables from the estate garden and herbs recommended by the physician. She carried it upstairs herself. "If you can manage only a few spoonfuls," she said gently, "it may still help restore your strength." The Duke accepted the bowl. He tasted it slowly. It was simple food, yet prepared with remarkable thoughtfulness. "You made this yourself?" he asked. She seemed embarrassed. "It seemed the proper thing to do. You have already worked since dawn." She smiled faintly. "So has your grace." Before he could answer, she collected the empty tray and returned downstairs without waiting for praise. Days blended quietly into one another. Letters from society became less frequent. Several noble acquaintances who had once visited weekly now sent servants delivering written messages instead of calling personally. Business partners postponed meetings until circumstances became clearer. The lively rhythm of Ashcombe Manor softened into careful silence. Lady Beatrice continued visiting, though only twice each week. She remained courteous. She brought newspapers, flowers, and occasional gifts. Yet conversation increasingly centered upon uncertain futures. "My father wonders whether certain estate agreements should be delayed. My aunt believes London has begun speculating about your condition. The season feels strangely different without your presence." The Duke listened patiently. Not once did she ask whether he felt lonely. Not once did she simply remain beside him without discussing tomorrow. One quiet evening Clara entered carrying freshly mended blankets. She noticed an open book resting untouched upon the Duke's lap. "I hope the story is not disappointing," she said. "I have read the same page 3 times." She laughed softly. "My father always claimed that happened whenever the mind carried heavier thoughts than the book." "You speak of him often." "He taught village children before illness took him. He believed kindness was the one lesson people remembered longest." The room grew comfortably silent. After a moment she added, "Sickness has a way of making people feel forgotten. My mother feared that most of all during her final months. I promised myself that if I ever cared for someone who was ill, I would never let them feel alone." Those words settled deeply within the Duke. She had offered neither grand promises nor dramatic declarations. She had simply shared a quiet conviction shaped by love and loss. As she extinguished the final candle and wished him peaceful rest, the Duke realized that every comforting moment during his supposed illness had come not from wealth, obligation, or noble birth, but from the steady compassion of the one person who expected absolutely nothing in return. The physician's reports grew increasingly solemn as another fortnight passed. Before concerned relatives, he explained that the Duke's strength had not returned as expected. Recovery remained possible, but no one could predict whether it would take months or years. The announcement was delivered calmly, without exaggeration, yet it quietly reshaped the expectations of everyone connected to Ashcombe Manor. Visitors became noticeably fewer. The grand entrance hall, once alive with polished carriages and distinguished callers, now stood peaceful for much of each afternoon. Letters still arrived, but many contained brief expressions of sympathy rather than genuine conversation. Several acquaintances who had once praised the Duke's generosity suddenly found themselves occupied with pressing engagements elsewhere. From behind the carefully arranged performance of illness, the Duke watched these subtle changes with mixed emotions. He did not feel anger. Instead, he felt the quiet sadness of discovering how quickly admiration could fade when usefulness appeared uncertain. Lady Beatrice requested a private meeting one bright morning. She entered with the same graceful composure she always possessed, though something in her expression seemed more thoughtful than affectionate. Taking the chair beside his bed, she folded her gloved hands carefully before speaking. "I have spent many evenings considering our future," she began. The Duke listened silently. "You deserve complete honesty from me." "You always have it," he replied. She lowered her eyes briefly. When we accepted our engagement, I believed we would build a long life together. I truly hoped for that future." She paused. But no one can ignore reality forever. The room remained still. "My parents believe uncertainty benefits neither of us. If your health never fully returns, both our families may spend years waiting for a wedding that cannot happen." Her voice remained gentle. "I believe it would be kinder if we ended our engagement now." The words carried no cruelty. There were no accusations, no raised voices, only the quiet acknowledgement that her hopes depended upon a future she could clearly see. The Duke studied her face for several moments before answering. "Thank you for speaking honestly." She looked surprised. "I feared you would resent me." "I cannot resent truth." A shadow of relief crossed her expression. "I sincerely hope you recover." "I believe you do." She stood gracefully, offered him one final respectful bow, and departed without bitterness. When the door closed, the Duke expected heartbreak. Instead, he experienced something unexpected: peace. Not because the engagement had ended, but because uncertainty had ended with it. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he had long mistaken admiration for love. The following days became strangely calm. He spent hours reading his grandfather's journal again, discovering fresh meaning in familiar passages. One sentence particularly lingered: "Character is never proven when life is comfortable. It appears quietly when comfort disappears." Those words no longer sounded philosophical. They sounded painfully true. Meanwhile, Clara continued serving exactly as she always had. She changed fresh flowers, prepared light meals, opened windows whenever pleasant weather arrived. She never behaved differently after learning the engagement had ended. Nor did she ask questions she considered private. One afternoon she noticed the Duke staring thoughtfully toward the gardens. "The roses seem brighter today," she observed. "They do. Perhaps because you finally looked outside instead of inward." The Duke smiled. "You have a remarkable way of saying difficult things gently. My father practiced that art." She returned to arranging bookshelves, as though nothing unusual had been said. A week later the physician gathered relatives and senior servants inside the drawing room. With carefully measured excitement, he announced remarkable news. "The Duke has shown extraordinary improvement." Relief spread instantly through the room. Within 2 days, Ashcombe Manor transformed once again. Carriages returned. Elegant visitors appeared carrying expensive gifts. Business partners requested meetings. Neighbors praised the miraculous recovery. Letters arrived in overflowing numbers, many describing how faithfully their writers had prayed throughout his illness. The contrast proved impossible to ignore. People who had nearly disappeared now hurried to renew old friendships. Several noble families even suggested introducing their daughters once the Duke regained full strength. Lady Beatrice also requested permission to visit. The Duke received her courteously in the library. "I am delighted by your recovery," she said sincerely. "So am I. I hope there are no unpleasant feelings between us." "There are none." She smiled with visible relief. "I shall always wish you happiness." "And I wish the same for you." They parted respectfully, neither pretending the past had been different than it truly was. That evening the Duke walked through the manor for the first time since the false illness had begun. Servants greeted him warmly. The gardens glowed beneath the golden light of sunset. Near the greenhouse, he found Clara trimming faded blossoms, exactly as she had countless evenings before. She looked pleasantly surprised to see him walking outdoors. "It is wonderful to see your Grace enjoying fresh air again." "It feels wonderful." They strolled slowly along the garden path. After several quiet moments, the Duke finally asked the question that had occupied his thoughts for weeks. "Why did you continue caring for me with such patience?" "You believed I might never recover." She considered the question carefully before answering. "When my mother became ill, many neighbors visited during the first weeks. They brought flowers and comforting words." She smiled sadly. As months passed, most stopped coming, not because they were unkind, but because healthy lives naturally moved forward. She gently touched a blooming rose. "I promised myself that whenever someone felt forgotten, I would remain as long as I could." You expected nothing in return. I was already receiving something. What was that? The knowledge that another person did not face difficult days entirely alone. The Duke looked at her with newfound understanding. At that moment, he realized the greatest discovery of his carefully planned test had never been learning who walked away. It had been recognizing the extraordinary heart that had quietly remained beside him all along, asking for neither gratitude nor reward, simply believing that compassion itself was reason enough to stay. Several months passed after the Duke's remarkable recovery, and life at Ashcombe Manor gradually settled into a peaceful rhythm. The excitement surrounding his illness faded, replaced by ordinary responsibilities, estate meetings, and village visits. Yet something within the Duke had changed forever. He no longer measured people by elegant manners, impressive family names, or polished conversations. Instead, he quietly observed the small choices they made when no one expected recognition. Although Clara resumed her regular duties without complaint, the Duke found himself seeking opportunities to speak with her. Their conversations remained respectful, never crossing the boundaries of propriety, yet they grew steadily longer. Sometimes they discussed books from the manor library. Other afternoons they spoke about the changing seasons, village customs, or the challenges of managing a large estate. Clara's thoughts were thoughtful, without being boastful. She listened carefully before answering, and whenever she disagreed, she did so with kindness rather than pride. One afternoon the Duke asked whether she missed teaching, knowing her father had once educated village children. "I was never a teacher," she replied with a gentle smile, "but father believed learning should never end simply because school does." The Duke nodded thoughtfully. Then perhaps neither should opportunity. Over the following weeks, he quietly arranged for Clara to receive lessons from the estate's retired governess. She studied literature, history, estate accounting, correspondence, and the etiquette expected among noble households. When Clara discovered who had arranged the instruction, she hesitated. "Your Grace, surely this expense should be spent elsewhere." "It already has been," he answered. "It has been invested in someone worthy." She lowered her eyes, humbled rather than delighted. "I fear people will misunderstand." People often misunderstand what they have never witnessed. Despite her growing education, Clara never attempted to imitate fashionable ladies or hide her humble beginnings. She remained the same considerate woman who greeted servants by name, carried baskets for elderly gardeners, and visited sick villagers on her free afternoons. Her kindness had never depended upon her position, and neither did it change with new opportunities. The Duke noticed that everyone within the manor trusted her. Stable hands sought her advice when family problems troubled them. The cook often asked her opinion before planning celebrations. Even children from nearby cottages smiled whenever she visited the village school carrying donated books. Watching these quiet moments, the Duke understood something that society had overlooked. Leadership was not created by titles. It was earned through daily compassion. One crisp autumn evening, the Duke invited his trusted physician to walk through the gardens. "You appear healthier than I have seen you in years," the physician remarked. "I am. The illness never existed." "No, but something was healed nonetheless." The Duke smiled. "I believe you understand." The physician looked toward the distant greenhouse where Clara carefully arranged late-blooming roses. "I suspected long before you admitted it." Several respected neighbors gradually became acquainted with Clara through charitable events organized by the estate. Although a few aristocrats quietly questioned why the Duke valued the opinions of a former maid, most found themselves impressed by her intelligence, modesty, and sincere concern for others. She never attempted to attract admiration, which somehow caused admiration to follow her naturally. One elderly baroness privately told the Duke, "There is an elegance that cannot be purchased or inherited. That young woman possesses it." Those words remained with him. As winter approached, the Duke often returned to his grandfather's library. One evening, he removed the weathered journal that had inspired his unusual test months before. Carefully placing it beneath his arm, he walked toward the small conservatory where Clara spent quiet evenings reading after completing her duties. She looked surprised by his visit. "I hope I am not interrupting." Never, Your Grace. He placed the journal upon the table and opened it to the familiar page. Would you read this sentence aloud? She leaned forward. Prosperity attracts admiration. Hardship reveals devotion. After reading it, she looked up with quiet curiosity. My grandfather wrote those words many years ago, the Duke said. I believed I understood them, but I did not. She remained silent. When I pretended to be ill, I expected to discover who would leave. His voice softened. Instead, I discovered who would stay. Clara's eyes widened as she slowly realized the truth. The illness. It was never real. She looked neither angry nor offended, only thoughtful. You trusted very few people with such a secret. I trusted no one except my physician. He paused. Until now. She closed the journal gently. I hope it brought you peace. It brought me something greater. He stepped closer. I found a person whose kindness never depended upon my title, my health, or my future. Emotion filled Clara's eyes. You deserve someone worthy of your heart, Your Grace. I believe I have found her. For several quiet moments, neither spoke. Finally, the Duke reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple family ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Clara, I cannot erase the difference in our beginnings. Neither would I wish to. Your past shaped the remarkable woman standing before me. He smiled warmly. But I hope our future may be shared. Will you become my wife? Tears gathered in her eyes before she answered. Yes. Their wedding took place the following spring in the village church rather than a grand cathedral. The ceremony was elegant yet modest, attended by family, loyal servants, village children, and neighbors whose lives had been touched by the Ashcombe estate. The Duke insisted that every servant who wished to attend be welcomed as an honored guest, not merely as household staff. Some members of high society whispered their opinions during the first months of the marriage. But gossip slowly disappeared as Clara proved herself a gracious and compassionate duchess. She expanded village schools, established assistance for widows, improved working conditions across the estate, and greeted every person with the same warmth she had shown while wearing a servant's apron. Years later, visitors remembered Ashcombe Manor not because of its magnificent halls or ancient title, but because everyone who crossed its gates was treated with fairness and dignity. Whenever young couples sought the Duke's advice about marriage, he never spoke of wealth, beauty, or family prestige. Instead, he simply smiled and repeated the words that had transformed his life. Prosperity attracts admiration. Hardship reveals devotion. For he had learned that true nobility was never inherited through birth alone. It was revealed quietly through compassion, strengthened by humility, and rewarded by a love that remained faithful when every worldly reason to stay had disappeared.